the event. If you do not want your message to be heard, please raise your hand so that way we can adjust the volume and make sure that it is not recorded. Okay? We'll do our best to make sure. Again, we'll do our best. Not 100% guarantee, but we're going to do our best. The other is, as we want to hear what you have to say, how you want to say it, as passionate you want to say it. But one of the things that we definitely need to know is, what is the end game? What is it? If we gave you that magic wand, what is it that you want to change? What is it that you want? Whatever. Change, correct it, those things. We definitely need that so that way we can fine tune exactly. Disagreement does not mean disrespect. If you're a Marine, 4-letter, 3-letter, K-bars, keep them all sheep. What branch of service? What branch of service? Marine Force. Oh, geez, you say. I'm just kidding. Without further ado, I turn it over to the Executive Director, Mr. Thomas Steinbrunner.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming out to our town hall. I wanted to let you know a little bit, one, about me, a little bit about our organization, and also answer questions that you have. I have a group of people with me today that no one person knows all of the answers, but on my side we have my chief nurse and associate director for patient care services, Mr. Francisco Hurtado, and we have our chief of community care, Dr. Julie Velosa-Keating. Both of those people are here. If you have questions that relate to clinical care and you want to talk about something very specific to you, we want to respect your individual information to make sure that we get you an answer, but also we don't do that in front of everybody else. I'm certainly happy to answer any other questions that you have along the way. So I want to introduce some other members of the team. Back in the back is Ms. Sterling Fix. She is our chief of our whole health program. In the far back, we have Mr. Daniel James. He is the manager for our community health-based clinic here in Juneau. Dan and his team provide care in the first floor of the federal building. We also have our partner with TriWest, Mr. John Lee. John is the vice president for their Alaska operations. His office is in Alaska, it's in Anchorage. And he has a team of support personnel that are here to ensure that providers and veterans who have concerns have someone in Alaska that they can reach out to. In Alaska, we are a small state, huge state with a small crew. We're the 7th smallest station in the entire country, with by far the largest land mass of responsibility. Just like the military had multiple branches of service, the VA has multiple lanes of management. So my team is within the Veteran Health Administration. I have my partners from the Veteran Benefits Administration. So again, if you have a question about benefits, we have a team of people who can certainly help you with that. I'm going to take a moment and introduce Chad and his team. Chad is the regional manager for the Benefits Administration in Alaska, and he'll talk a little bit about what they do. And then we also have Jonathan Penna and Dr. Hopkins, who's going to be able to provide some insights as to what they do from a both rehab perspective.
All right, thanks. Is this working? Let me make sure. We'll in technology over to the. There we go. So I know that there's one Air Force person in the room, so I'll talk a little slower. Well, I was with the yeah, Chad Polo. I'm with the Veteran Benefit Administration, and my part of the program, we mostly process disability compensation claims. Like Tom was saying, we're siloed in VA. We have a director that would be equivalent to Tom. She's actually in state right now, but generally she's in Portland, Oregon, Renee Murphy, and our assistant director would be Melissa Day, also out of the Portland office. I want to talk to you guys a little bit about FACHE. I just jump right into that a little bit. Hopefully, veterans in the room have at least heard of this new piece of legislation, FACHE. Usually I can remember the full name of it. It's Sergeant Keith Robinson remembering our promise to address toxic, I'm forgetting it, but now you know why it's called the FACHE Act. It's just easier for us Army people to remember FACHE Act. FACHE Act is a piece of legislation that has expanded benefits to probably about 4 million veterans that previously wouldn't have been eligible for disability compensation benefits. It added some new disabilities to the presumptive list for Agent Orange. So Vietnam veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange, there was already a list of presumptive disabilities. It added a couple more, the big one being hypertension. So if a veteran served in Vietnam, they were going to be, because the exposure to Agent Orange is conceded from the service in Vietnam. If they have hypertension, we're just going to presume that the Agent Orange exposure caused that disability. Also, there's a list of disabilities that have been added for Gulf War veterans who served over in Gulf War, obviously. Due to burn pit particulate matter, there's a list of those, a lot of respiratory type of conditions that have been added to that. And then, kind of like the wild card of the whole PACT Act is the piece that's called the toxic exposure risk activity. And that kind of opens up to any veteran based on any toxic exposure they may have had. Could have been associated with their military occupation. Say you're a fuel handler and you was exposed to benzene, petroleum product, and you have a disability now that could be related to that. We now can move forward with a disability claim for that. Could have been you were stationed somewhere that doesn't have a presumption, such as Agent Orange or particulate matter, but it was in an area that had some other toxic chemical exposure. We could look at that as well. I just like to differentiate the presumptive disabilities from kind of like it just goes hand in hand. You were in Vietnam, you were exposed to Agent Orange, and now you have hypertension. That's kind of all presumed. With the toxic exposure risk activity, it's a little more complicated. You would file your disability claim with us. You would tell us what the toxic exposure was and what your disability is. Then we have to evaluate that and verify that you did have that exposure. And then once we verified that, along with your current disability, we would set you up for a medical exam. And as part of that medical exam, we would ask for a medical opinion. The medical opinion would be, is it at least as likely as not that your current disability is related to whatever toxic exposure it was. It's a 51% type of deal. It's not the preponderance of the evidence, just 51%. So it's a low threshold for that. But I really wanted to just make sure I talked about the PACT Act as a new piece of legislation. And definitely I'll be happy to answer any compensation claims that occur.
Thanks. Thanks, Chad. And okay, the other thing to mention with the PACT Act was one of 3 main legislations that was passed by Congress in the recent years. PACT Act expands the benefits that our veterans have access to. It's really a once-in-a-generation, huge expansion of opportunities for veterans to secure benefits that they may not have been entitled to before. The other 2 acts that were passed, one was the Service Act. And the Service Act is really a companion of the PACT Act. And the Service Act is really looking at our women veterans who are at risk for breast cancer because of one of those exposures. And it provides access to screenings that they may not have otherwise had access to. And the last one is the Compact Act. And the Compact Act provides for veterans who are either enrolled or not enrolled that have an acute suicide condition where they are experiencing a situation where they need immediate help. This allows them to have access to inpatient or outpatient services to address that immediate need. There are some limitations, but it rapidly expands the aperture of those who are eligible. The key point with that is there's an opportunity for up to 30 days of an inpatient stay that would be covered for that veteran, or up to 90 days worth of outpatient services to stabilize that veteran and get them back to where they need to be. So 3 huge pieces of legislation. The other thing that comes with that legislation, though, is a significant change on the part of the Department of Veteran Affairs to participate in the National Suicide Crisis Line. long 10-digit number that you had to memorize to get into that crisis line. We've joined the national crisis line, which is 988. And all you have to do is push the number 1 to connect for counselors that are particularly associated with supporting veterans and veteran family members. So something good to have in your wallet or your purse, something good to have in your phone. If you run across a veteran in crisis, certainly we want to make sure that we get them the help that they need. Chad mentioned the PACT Act, and one of the things that we do on the veteran health side is we do toxic exposure screenings. Dan and his clinic have provided a little over 260 or so screenings here in the Juneau area for veterans, and certainly they're available to provide those screenings through any of the outreach modalities, whether you have a phone appointment, a VPC appointment, or a video connect appointment, or a face-to-face appointment with his team. In addition, if you haven't already had your toxic exposure screening, Francisco Hurtado is in the back, who's our chief nurse, and Dr. Julie Rose and Katie are here today, and they are willing to do your screenings for you. So just if you have an interest, that's a certain way to get that started. The other thing I would mention, though, the screening gets the ball going. You have a claim that you have filed in order to get your service-connected ratings so far. If you have an added exposure that you want to claim through this new legislation, the key is you have to file for that benefit. And our team is here to help you with that. You can do that either through a VSO, which is the best way to do it, a Veteran Service Organization. You can do that through our VBA team in Anchorage or their 800 number. But the key is making sure that you take that extra step to ensure that you're filing for those benefits. Another portion of the VBA team is the VOC Rehab team. So I want to turn it over to our good friend Jonathan to talk a little bit about VOC Rehab.
Thanks. Hi folks, I'm Jonathan Penna. I'm the Veteran Readiness and Employment Officer at the Anchorage VA Regional Office. About 3 years ago, we rebranded ourselves, if you will, from Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment Services to Veteran Readiness and Employment Services. We still hire vocational rehabilitation counselors. We still practice the art of vocational rehabilitation counseling. We just wanted to make sure that people did not rule themselves out in regards to the name associated with vocational rehabilitation. Additionally, I know the VHA side also has a vocational rehabilitation services division as well. We all have the same goal, to get folks employed or engaged in the community if employment is not a feasible option for them or a pathway that they'd like to pursue with the program. To be entitled to the program that we have, one would have to first be rated through compensation and pension through the service center. So in some ways we're stakeholders of Chad and Chad's division and the success that they bring in to the community as well. And then an individual would be entitled to our program or eligible to have an entitlement determination if they had a discharge other than dishonorable. So many folks use our program for educational benefits and supports. Some educational benefits out there might rule you out if you don't have an honorable discharge. For those folks, I say come to us, seek our services. There's probably some employment supports we can provide to you. Again, we're just precluded from working with individuals with a dishonorable discharge, although we may be able to sync you up with supports if you want to advocate or receive some advocacy assistance with the disposition of discharge that's been provided as well. So that's your first step. Apply for the VRD program, Veteran Readiness and Employment Services Program. You can do that on va.gov. If you have Google 28-1900, that's the application for VRD services. You make sure that gets into our program. I will spell out my email address. I field questions. I route questions as necessary, and I know this will be on YouTube, I believe. Yes. Streaming, so folks can watch and rewind and then rewind again if you want to take this down. So my telephone number is 206-390-6417, and my email address is jonathan.penna@va.gov. That's 2 N's in my last name. So Juliet, Oscar, November, Alpha, Tango, Hotel, Alpha, November, dot Papa, Echo, November, if you want more information on the Veteran Readiness and Employment Officer. And with that being said, I'm here to field questions as time goes on, but I'll yield back my time. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. A couple things I want to give you an update on this Alaska VA, and then also then want to make sure that we open up for some questions and answer your concerns. I forgot to mention that I too am a veteran. I served 34 years in the Air Force. Colonel Francis Gortado, our chief nurse, is an Army Reserve Colonel. Jay, our whole health program manager, is a retired Army as well. And we have the good public affairs officer has baby in the house, so he will not let you forget that for sure. In February, we had the honor of hosting the Secretary of the VA, Dennis McDonough. He came up to Anchorage and up to Fairbanks and then out to Bethel. The opportunity for him was he was there as we opened up our brand new CBOC in Fairbanks. We renamed the main campus that we have in Anchorage after Colonel Mary Louise Rasmussen, who was a trailblazer in her own right. She was the 5th director of the Army Women's Corps. She enlisted when the Army Women's Corps first stood up as a private in the Army. She rose to the ranks up to become the director, appointed successively by Presidents Eisenhower and Kennedy. And she was instrumental in the integration of women into the active components of the military. And then after she retired in 1962, she spent the next 50 years advocating on behalf of veterans, especially here in the state of Alaska. So we had the opportunity to have our facility renamed after her. The other thing I would point out is during the Secretary's visit, we had the unusual experience of having all 3 members of the delegation with us at both events, which is really something that you won't normally see. And so I think that speaks to the strength of the delegation's support for veterans and the services that are needed to support our veterans in Alaska and ensuring that we have that ability to continue to provide. Budgetarily, we are doing very well within the VA. I'm sure you've seen in the news the issue associated with the debt ceiling. Veteran health care is still covered. We have a multi-year appropriation, so unlike most of the other agencies, our appropriation has an advance appropriation that goes out 1 additional year. So we're covered for healthcare expenditures. There are a number of things that could be impacted. We are all recipients if we're a veteran and are service connected. There may be an issue associated with those payments and whatnot, but that's an issue of whether or not the federal government goes into default with the debt ceiling. So from a healthcare perspective, I just want to assure you that we're still covered. A couple of other things I want to mention. We have made some significant improvements. When you get a phone call from us now, from our Juneau clinic, you'll see that it came from the VA's Juneau clinic instead of some random number that you're not sure who's on the other side of the line. So we worked with GCI to ensure that that'll ring across your phone, identifying the caller as from the VA. I think that's a huge improvement. Hopefully that'll cut down on phone call back and forth when people aren't quite sure who's on the other side and we end up missing each other. A couple other things. We do have a opportunity if you want to interface with your healthcare provider or their team through My Healthy Vet. It's secure messaging for providing requests for information to your healthcare team and or filling renewals of your prescriptions and other great ideas, and we have a flyer that kind of explains that for you. It's important though, and I raised this from the perspective of looking at it from a pharmacy refill perspective. Oftentimes what we've seen is a veteran will end up with a bottle that's almost empty, and there'll be a time for getting a renewal, and there may be a concern about whether it'll come in on time. A best practice would be if you have refills still available, as soon as you get the bottle, utilize one of the refill options, and My Healthy Vet is the easiest one. Check the box, indicate that you would like your next refill provided. They're not going to mail it the next day. What they'll do is they'll queue that up and then send that out to ensure that you get it before your medication runs out. You can also send in the information that's on the package that comes with your medication if you want to mail it send it in by mail. You can also call the pharmacy and ask for a renewal. But the simplest way is through the My Healthy Vet option. And again, we have a flyer on how to participate in that if you would like. In addition, we have a whole health program that we have to provide rounded out services for our veterans that are not the traditional allopathic see a provider, get a medication prescribed approach. And so I want to invite Jay to come down and talk a little bit about our whole health program. And we have a great flyer.
I have one of those army voices. So I think you should be able to hear me, right? Can you hear me just fine? Without that? Good.
Yes, ma'am.
Good. Okay. So thank you. So everybody calls me Jay, but my name is Julian Feck. So I have my pamphlets in the back of the room if you want to see anything about whole health, and I also pass those pamphlets out to you. So whole health is all about taking care of yourself and taking care of your family and about everything about the person, the whole person. So when you see me, I'm concerned about, are you getting your massage therapy? Are you getting your acupuncture? Are you getting your meditation? Do you know anything about my yoga, my Tai Chi, my coaching? Okay, this is all about you and taking care of you and your family. So whole health is all about taking care of the person and making sure that you have everything you need in place. So I don't know if we believe anything else. There's so much about whole health. So we do coaching, we do drum circles. So anything you really want to know about taking care of you and taking care of your mental health and well-being. We also support suicide prevention. So we don't like to stress that because we have a suicide prevention team. But we're here, my team is here to support you. If you do need to hit that number, go to 988, or you just call Jay on the back of on the cards that I gave you, and I'll be there for you. Okay? So we also do coaching, mental health, meditation. You know, when I say meditation, I say these other strange things to you. It's all about complementary health care, right? And most people don't have a clue what I'm talking about. So what I'm going to do is do some meditation for you right now. So I'm doing my class, right? I promised Mrs. Steinbrunner that I would do a class. So right now, I want everybody to take a deep breath. Close your eyes if you feel comfortable. If you don't, just focus on the room, focus on the environment. Take one deep breath in. Hold it. Let it out. Take another deep breath in. Hold it. Let it out. I want you to think about the clouds in the sky right now. They're blue. Sun is shining through them. And I want you to say to yourself, silently please, may I be happy. May I be healthy. May I be peaceful. And may I be safe. I want you to inhale one more time, please. And let it out. And this time, I want you to say to yourself, may my family be happy. May my family be healthy. May my family be at peace, and may my family be safe. Thank you. If you want to know anything else about whole health, I want you to contact me. Thank you, Steinbrunner.
All right, thank you. So again, I want to open up the time for questions from you. If you have an individual.
So, sir, do you mind talking about the transportation in 30 days? I don't know if you mentioned that.
Oh, sorry. I would love to do that. Something else, you know, the president has signed agreements that the pandemic for COVID ended on the 11th of May. I'm sure you saw that in the media. There's a number of things that change with that, but the one that's most important for veterans is that under the pandemic, one of the things that was waived was the 30-day time frame for filing a veteran transportation claim. So if you're veteran beneficiary travel eligible and you wanted to file a claim, that 30-day clock was waived during the pandemic. That waiver, with the rest of the pandemic ending, goes away. So if you have any claims that are for beneficiary travel, you want to make sure that you get those submitted within 30 days. And so anything that was pre 11 May, certainly from 11 May forward is 30 days, so you don't have to worry about doing the math there. But claims that are from the 12th to 13th, whatever, moving forward also have a 30-day clock individually with them. Thanks. Again, if you have an individual question that you want to talk about a healthcare specific thing, love to do that one-on-one with you. If you want to have a toxic exposure screening, either Francisco or Dr. Reloza Keating can take care of you and make sure that your toxic exposure screening is completed. If you have a benefit question, we have a team from VBA that's happy to provide a one-on-one answer on whether it's a claim for service or a concern with your disability rating. They can certainly take your information and work with that. And then the other thing, before I open up for questions, I also want to introduce that we have a new provider here for the Juneau area, Susan Ruxton. And Susan was in our new employee orientation on Monday. She's not new to the VA, so she has experience with our electronic health record, and she understands the way the VA operates, and so she'll be joining the team physically on site. She'll be here on Monday, so there'll be an opportunity to interface with her as our provider. We hope and expect that she'll be with us for quite some time. I know there's been some transition or with providers over the last several years as certain providers have either stepped down for their duties or moved to other parts of the country. So with that, I'd like to open it up for any questions.
If you need your microphone, just wave your hand and I'll bring it to you. If not,
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
My husband was on, I think, 13 Coast Guard ships. And I remember the last one he was on, which was the Tamaroa. And the pipes had asbestos around them. Is that, how does that fit into all of this medical?
So if you remember Chad's statement about other exposures,
Okay.
this is an opportunity to look at that exposure that the individual had experienced. So with our, I don't want to get too deep into Chad's water, but the way a service connection is determined is you have to have an experience, or in this case, it would be him working on the ship, right? And you have to have a condition. And there needs to be, those two have to happen. So just because you were in the Coast Guard doesn't necessarily mean you have a condition, right? But if you do, there's an opportunity to evaluate whether that condition caused that, or that exposure caused that condition. And that's where the other toxic substances portion of the PACT Act opens up that door and that aperture. Other conditions, like what he described with Agent Orange, and for our Vietnam veterans, that condition has, or that connection has a nexus that's already developed. You were in Vietnam, you have this condition, no one has to guess how you got it. The government's decided to take responsibility by saying your presence was your service incident and your condition, it's tied together. Anything you want to add on that, Chad?
I think you summed that up well, for sure. But definitely, I would just restate what Ms. Steinbrunner had said. Having an exposure in and of itself is not going to be a service-connected disability. So, you know, the lady here has mentioned asbestos exposure. If somebody develops a respiratory asbestosis type of disability, then we definitely would look at the asbestos exposure, consider that, get the medical opinion for that nexus. But being exposed to something in and of itself is not going to be a service-connected disability. You have to have a disability.
And there's an opportunity then for your husband to file for those benefits through the Veteran Service Office or the Veteran Benefits Administration, and have his rating reevaluated.
So when I had to send 39 pages up to Mike Woodard, and he registered him for Agent Orange, and then all those papers got shoved into a drawer. Nothing ever happened with that. And so I called Mike Woodard and asked him, like, what's happening? So he says, well, we don't need those papers anymore. Do you want me to shred them or do you want them back? I said, oh, don't shred them, send them back. And he did. And then the next thing I know, I get an email from somebody up in Anchorage. And she said she doesn't have access to a fax machine. And she emailed me papers that to this day, I don't know why, but on that form that I printed off, it said, when did you first join the Coast Guard? When did you retire or leave the Coast Guard? And it had all these questions. And what was the purpose of that?
Sure.
Being as we had filled them out prior to that.
So what I will do, ma'am, because I won't be able to give you an answer right here, but what I will do is Francis will capture your information. We'll look specifically into what still might be required for you and see how we can help you navigate, whether it's with Chad's team on the VBA side or with our team in the registry department down there with our comprehensive section. But we'll figure out where the hole is and we'll help get it filled.
Did I hear you say they were the same forms, or they might have been different?
I don't know. The forms change constantly.
Okay.
We'll track it down.
Okay.
And so have all those 39 pages been uploaded to the VA health system?
We'll have to look. Again, I don't have a magic ball to tell you that standing here, but we'll look and we'll get you an answer.
Thank you.
And Francisco's standing right behind you and he'll get your
Do
information.
you need a microphone, ma'am? Well, I thought you put your hand up. Nope.
Well, actually, I was wondering, any updates on the community care program?
Yeah, so couple things. One, John Lee is our Vice President for Tri-West, which manages our care in the community contract, the network that we have. Specifically, what kind of questions do you have?
Well, it's just like being in Southeast, for specialists that are not here, like dermatology or neurology or that type. We tend to go down to Seattle because it's cheaper than going to Anchorage. But it just seems like there's this push now to cut back on travel and try and take people that are already established with those specialists and bring them to Puget Sound VA for unrelated specialists.
Yeah, so there's a couple things that we're looking at. One is obviously in much of Alaska, we don't have a very deep bench when it comes to specialists. There are a couple things that we have done within the Alaska VA healthcare system in partnership with our regional office. Our region is the Northwest market, which is Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Alaska. And so we have added a couple specialties that are available to us in the state from a tele perspective. It's not a full range, and so we're not looking to transition complex patients to that wholesale, because that doesn't really make sense from a continuity, but it does provide a capability that we haven't had before. And that's in, we've added tele-endocrinology and tele-rheumatology. Do we have enough to cover our needs? And of course not. They're hard to find specialties. So second question to your question about referring veterans that we have currently going to Southeast, or I'm sorry, down to Puget Sound. We have veterans in the Southeast. It probably doesn't make a difference financially per se whether we send the veteran south or north, and so it's to our veterans' best interest in much of Southeast to go down to Seattle, because that's an easier plane ride, and it's a shorter distance, and as you mentioned, oftentimes the cost is actually cheaper. And so we have, as part of a large integrated system in the VA, our region is down in Vancouver, Washington, and so we have access to the Region 4 network just as much as we do the Region 5 network. So when we send a veteran to a provider in the Seattle area, it's covered through our contract that we have. We do have large tertiary facilities down in the Northwest at Puget Sound in Seattle and Portland, Oregon as well. And they both provide a wealth of specialty care. And when appropriate, we have referrals looked at, what we call it a inter-facility consult, where our chief of staff sends a consult to a specialty clinic for their consults to make sure that we are meeting the needs of that veteran, and if the care is something that's not typical, whether or not that meets VA standard of care. And so in terms of pushing our veterans out of our community care referrals, we don't have a general practice of taking people out of providers that they have established, because we value that continuity of care. But we do look to see where it makes sense to utilize our sister facilities where appropriate. Is Dr. Rosa Keating with somebody, or?
She's on her way.
Okay, and Julie can provide a little bit more insight specifically on how the referrals work. But she'll be here in a second, and we'll make sure that we have an additional update. Any other questions?
I'm gonna put him on the spot.
I got a question with
Yep, go ahead.
I'll talk to him later.
Okay.
Okay.
I talked to you a lot already.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to make sure you get your questions there. They're there.
Is it Chad? Is that Chad?
That is Chad.
Okay,
Absolutely.
I want to talk to him.
All right.
If you have a question in terms of your disability claim, we want to make sure that we've got experts that can help navigate. They may have to go back into their computers as well, but they'll take your information and make sure that they get an answer back to you. But what other questions can I answer while we're waiting for Julie to arrive?
I have a question on that matter. I'm trying to keep my things general, but
Sure.
Service-connected issues. Do you need to be on mic?
No, I think you're loud.
Okay.
I can.
Service-connected issues. Once you've reached 100% disability, in my experience, that they got about halfway through my record, and they're like, "Okay, you're at 100%." So, not complaining, but anything that was left that needed to be adjudicated just kind of fell off the radar, so to say. And I'm like, well, shouldn't that still be evaluated so that should I need something down the road, you know, that needs to be in there?
Absolutely. And the Secretary, when he was here in February, when he had a town hall in Bethel and up in Fairbanks as well, he emphasized that if you have a service-connected disability that you believe should be measured, we want to make sure that that is accounted for.
Mhm.
It's not going to change your overall rating from 100 to anything higher than 100, but it's going to demonstrate that you have that connection to that disability, and there may be other benefits that you might be entitled to based on that connection. But I'm going to let Chad speak a little bit
And
more
this
to
is,
that.
I retired 4 years ago, so, you know, kind of went through the whole process
Mhm.
successfully, but at that time, and this person's no longer affiliated with your team, but the answer back was, you're at 100%, what do you want? And I'm
Right.
like, well, that's not important. I want to make sure that you've looked at everything. It's been a while since I've looked at that whole list, but it's kind of like they got down, they hit that number, and it stopped. You know,
Right.
as far as saying, well, we need to close this out either as it's not service connected or it is, it just kind of like the process just stopped once it
Well,
hit there.
Sure.
So I think, and it becomes a paperwork drill where I'm like, I'm just only gonna spend so much time now that I'm retired after 32 years playing I don't keep office hours anymore, 9 to 5, chasing a lot of these phone calls. And that's kind of been my experience,
Sure.
is that, and I get it, that's a good team to have, but once you're retired, we don't work 9 to 5 making phone calls. So that would be some of my feedback, and I'd be happy to speak to some individual, I have some individual things.
Sure.
But I just was like, well, I'm gonna let it go. If it pops up, I'll deal with it then. But the process worked up into a point where it was like, you're done, you hit that number, and we're not gonna be sending you to specialists to follow up on any of these things. And nothing's popped up since then, but I made a note because when you were talking about that service connected, I was exposed to some stuff. I wouldn't know if one of my disabilities is connected to it because I wasn't screened. So to this lady's point, it's like, you don't know what you don't know because we're not medical professionals.
Sure.
We could be suffering with something that if that didn't exist when I went through the loop, I wouldn't know, but I could still be suffering from it. And, I have a laundry list of things that stopped being processed when I hit that 100 number. So it's just more a process issue, but, you don't know if you have anything, if it hasn't been completed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it sounds like maybe you and I can talk a little bit more individually about some of that stuff. But for everybody, I would say things to be aware of. If you get to that 100%, there's definitely benefits with continuing to file other claims if you have a legitimate disability. Some disabilities have severities that can lead to special monthly compensation, which is above the 100% rate. Your disability evaluation is never going to get above the combined 100%, but there is special monthly compensation that can be added in addition to those, based on what your disabilities are. And the other thing is, definitely like the screening that VHA is doing, but particularly now under this PACT Act, I think the government is trying to gather data from veterans, something we haven't really done a good job of in the past. Or what are some of these disabilities that veterans have? Are there other benefits, other disabilities out there that should be moved over into the presumptive category? In other words, a lot of veterans have this disability. A lot of veterans who are in this area or in this job specialty or whatever case may be have this disability. There's a connection there. Let's just make it a presumptive. So definitely would encourage anybody to file for those type of claims. Get through the screening so we can gather that data as well. I think in the future we're going to see more presumptive disabilities coming out as a result of veterans being willing to come forward with those disabilities and participate in those screening activities. But I know this gentleman wants to talk to me, and I would be happy to talk to you as well when we're done.
If I may, one of the things, because with the patient advocates and veteran experience, we have a lot of veterans come in. The other reason I applaud you for that question, because if you are diagnosed to get a service connected for something that you pass away from, your spouse, correct or wrong, they are now entitled to the DIC. So that's way, if it is a disability or something, you still keep plugging.
no matter what that number is. Everybody can do the calculations, but it is imperative. And I hope everybody hears me. You do not stop filing for any of your disabilities that you come up with, but they have to be service connected. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, for a service connected death.
Yes.
And then there is a provision that if you've been service connected 100% for over 10 years, then also you could be, survivors could be eligible for the same benefit. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chad. And again, I appreciate you bringing that forward. You know, I'm sorry you had that experience. We certainly want to make it right. So, and
timing wise, I retired in June of 19, and then we had COVID. You know,
sure.
by the time the VA was done with making their final determination, I think it was January of 20, and then we went on this madness, through the country. So a lot of things stopped, understandably, for the VA, and I think some forms that were submitted, they sent out a letter saying, hey, if we've lost any forms, mea culpa, let us know. But I was disheartened that was the response from the person when I said, well, yeah, I may be at that number, and that's not what I'm concerned about. It's more of, what are you going to do with that pile of things that haven't been adjudicated, just so they're in my record.
No, absolutely. So let me just explain a little other piece of data. The Veterans Service Organizations, and I'm not sure which one you used, and you can share that with Chad. And the reason I say share that with Chad is it gives an opportunity to provide feedback. That person may or may not be doing this role anymore, but it's feedback to the broader organization on how we can better provide service. Veterans Service Organizations work under the state director of VA, so Mr. Bertie Bowen. They get their license, if you will, to function in that role through the state. And that's just the way when the VA was established, that Congress aligned it so that it would be a advocacy level at the state level versus the VA advocating for or against itself. So that's how that's arranged. But they work under the Veteran Benefits Administration's ultimate management of the program. So if you saw an American Legion, VFW, DAV representative, and they filed that, they get their license through the state of Alaska, but they ultimately forward the paperwork on to Chad and his team for adjudication.
We have a question up here, sir.
Yes, sir.
Hello. My name is Patrick Credo, and I'm from here, Juneau. I'm also a combat veteran, Marine Corps, Vietnam. On the benefits section here, veterans who had claims that were previously denied can file supplement claims.
Yes, sir.
I tried to do that a few years ago. I think I'm already at 100%, but I was told that I couldn't do that. But if I died from it, then it would be effective, I guess I'm trying to say. And now, right now, I'm under a search clinic in Juneau because when I got back home, I was asked, do I want to stay with search or stay with the veterans? Well, I came back home to Juneau after 50 years I've been gone. Now I'm back home, and now search is really expounded, and new buildings and all kinds of things going on. And I see that our Native people are getting better treatment. So I decided to stay with search. Now, my doctor told me a few days ago that there's something else that's coming on me, and I don't know what it is. I've never heard of it. I'm going to see her in a week and have her explain again what this, I don't know, disease or what it is. It going to kill me or what? I never heard of it. So if that happens, I don't know what to do.
Sure. No, thank you, Patrick, for raising that. There's a couple things, and turn it over to Chad to talk about refiling for your benefits. But Julie, who's standing right behind you, Dr. Rosa Keating, she'll get your information to make sure that we can follow back up with you individually on your situation. But also want to let you know that your care and your continuity with search is not in question. The VA has a relationship with our tribal health organizations throughout the state. So that part, don't worry about. But Julie will get with you with regard to making sure that authorization, if you have additional care that's needed, that can be arranged. And then Chad will talk a little bit about the resubmission or filing for a supplement.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
All right, yeah, so when the VA makes a determination on pretty much anything, but for my lane, I'll stay in my lane for service-connected disability, veterans have 1 year to appeal that decision. So in the case of this gentleman here, combat veteran from Vietnam, thank you. 1 year from the time we make that decision, the veteran can appeal it. I have basically 3 choices. You can submit new evidence to us and ask us to consider the new evidence. You can ask for a higher level review, which means you don't have any new evidence, you just think that maybe we didn't make the right decision. And it gets evaluated at a higher level, a position higher than the person that made the original decision. Or you can send it right to the Board of Veterans Appeals. And you can take multiple bites at that apple, and by that, let me just use this as an example. You could, after a decision, you could come back with additional evidence, and we may still uphold our previous decision, and at that point you could decide, well, I want a higher level review, I want somebody at a higher level to look at this. And that person may uphold that decision, and then you could send it to the Board of Veterans Appeals as well. So you can basically go in 3 different directions. Now, after that year, generally you would have to come back with what is new material evidence, something new that we haven't considered before. If it's change in legislation, Act, Vietnam veteran, if, I'll just make a hypothetical, if the disability that was denied for a Vietnam veteran previously was hypertension, but now hypertension is one of the disabilities listed, that would be the new evidence that we would need, and we could reconsider your claim based on that.
Because I understand too that we're given the benefit of the doubt, right?
The
benefit of the doubt.
Well, the benefit of the doubt, but it depends on what the evidence shows. I mean, I would be happy to talk to you one-on-one about your particular situation. But going back to the earlier discussion, in order to be service-connected for a disability, you have to have a current disability. There had to be an event in service that caused that, and then we would ask for that medical opinion. A medical provider would say, yes, the veteran has this current disability. I see in his service treatment or her service treatment records there was this event, and it is my medical opinion that event is causing this disability. If any one of those 3 doesn't hold up, then we wouldn't be able to grant the disability. So we have to have evidence. A veteran can't, by reasonable doubt, we can't just accept the veteran's word that they say, hey, I got injured, I injured my right knee when I was in basic training. We're going to need to see in the service treatment records that there was an injury in basic training. So I don't, am I answering your question or am I?
It's also secondary.
Secondary is a great question. Well, to get the mic ready for that, if you have a current disability, we've service connected for it. I like to use a right hip. In this example, I talk about it all the time. You're service connected for a right hip. Because of your right hip disability, that causes you to alter your gait, and now your knee hurts from the way you've been walking. We would consider secondary your knee associated with that hip. There could be any other disability, but definitely could be secondary. And then while I'm also rattling off about that, if you have been rated, say you're 30% for your hip, but over the years it just gets worse, you can file for an increase. Some veterans think that it's a one and done. We made our decision in 2010 and you're stuck with it for life, and that's not the case. If your disability gets worse, let us know and we'll reevaluate.
I was told that a few years back that I have Agent Orange real bad, and that it's going to kill me, and that it's in my bone marrow. That's how heavy it is. So I don't know what, if there's, I don't know if there's any kind of medication to take it out or what. I don't know.
So, just for clarity, Agent Orange itself is not a disability. It goes back to what I said before. Being exposed to a chemical in and of itself is not a disability. Now, you did mention in your case that you have some maybe disability that is in your bones. That's something that we could look at separately for sure, and see if there is a link with that in Agent Orange or any other toxic exposure you may have had. I don't know what you did in the military. You were in Marines. Maybe if you were a wheel mechanic and you handled grease, possibly the grease is a toxic exposure. Whatever it may have been, we could evaluate your case individually.
Yeah, so Patrick, if you don't mind, Chad will get with you and make sure that we have you connected so that if you would like to pursue a supplemental, he can help guide you through that process.
Thank you.
With that, I certainly want, if you have any questions on an individual basis, again, I will be happy to take questions. We have our VDA team between Brenda and Jonathan and Chad who can talk with you about your claims and make sure we capture your information. If you have a specific claim issue associated with care in the community, Dr. Rosa Keating, she's in the back if you want to wave. She can certainly take your questions as well. If you would like to get a toxic exposure screening, Francisco Hurtado can do that, or Dr. Rosa Keating can do that as well. And they'd be happy to make sure that you're supported and covered this evening and get that into the medical record for you. With that, I want to thank you for coming out this evening and spending time with us. We plan on doing town halls on a regular basis. Our hope is that we will use this venue moving forward here in the Juneau area, at least doing this quarterly. If there's anything that you would like to see in the future, please make sure that you let Sam know so that we can help facilitate that. But thank you again for your participation this evening.
The question I have, briefly scanning this paperwork, it says you have to be with an exam every 5 years. So does that mean we have to go to Anchorage?
You do not.
That can be done here?
Yes, ma'am. Our clinic can do the toxic exposure screening. It comes up as a clinical reminder for them